When you receive one of our kits, it comes in this beautiful little box. And you open her up. It's a little bit like Christmas, isn't it, really? And what you have is this little pile of fairly well packed goodness. Gasket kit. Piston, gudgeon pin, but we can see a problem here, can't we? And that the rings have to be fitted to the piston. This is one of our standard kits, by the way, and believe it or not, despite the fact that we put so much emphasis on the big bores, this is the kit that we sell the most of. It's just a standard run-of-the-mill replacement Honda piston and cylinder kit, and they're actually pretty good value. You can see here that what you have is enough to basically recondition the cylinder part of your engine in the space of a day. I mean, even a novice home mechanic can install one of these in a few hours, providing he understands what he's doing. But what I'd like to look at is actually fitting the rings to a piston, because I can imagine that this might be a little bit scary. I have to tell you that they are, there is a particular order that these rings must go on, and they must go the right way up. Even though it doesn't appear it, particularly usually the second ring, the rings aren't quite flat, they're disc-shaped. So we'll have a quick look at how it's done, and this will mean that I'll hopefully never get an email saying I broke my rings installing it into the into the engine, and you know, and I need some new ones, please. Now you can imagine that this is pushing my camera pretty hard to come in so close, so I'm sorry that this isn't going to be as clear as I'd like it to be. However, we can see what we need to see. So this is the set of rings, the two top rings off the standard kit. And you can see that they're two different colours. One is silver and one is black. Now the top ring, which is the silver ring, that usually takes quite a beating. It's open to the flame front of the engine and things like that. There's a lot of thrust on it, so it's usually made of pretty stern stuff, or it's chrome plated, or you know, the materials used in rings are quite varied. So that silver ring is the top ring. Now in this particular instance, when I look at that closely, I can see that the shape of that ring is actually fairly square, and there's no top mark on it. So that can go in either way. Now be warned that that doesn't hold true for all of our kits. I source rings from around the place a little bit. If I find something better, I will swap to that. Not all rings will be like that, unmarked and able to go in any direction. Now the second ring is black, and that usually is ductile iron most of the time. Now it's a little different, where its shape is slightly disc-shaped in this instance, and it must be installed in the correct direction, or the piston and the ring may fail. In the very least, what you will get is a lot of blow-by, because instead of the shape working to seal the blow-by gases, it's going the other way and basically letting them pass. Now if you look very, very, very closely, you'll see a mark just there. Can you see that near the tip of the screwdriver? You can sort of see that. That little mark means up. So if you ever get a set of rings and there's no instructions with them, often there are instructions, most of the time, sometimes they're not. Any time that one of these two rings, or even the oil control rings, have a mark near the gap like that, that basically means that that is the face of the ring that points towards the top of the piston. Now the other ring, as I said, it doesn't have that mark, and those marks will always be around the end gap. However, taking these away, we have another set, and you should be able to just see blurrily. We've got a top mark on that one, and we've got a top mark on that one. Now that mark there, actually, if you look at it closely, it actually says 2R. So it's even saying I'm the second ring. And that one just says R, which is the first ring. But once again, silver and black. So these guys are basically off one of the big bores. And, you know, in this instance, they both have to be facing in the correct direction. So once again, that R or that mark always faces up towards the top of the piston. Now your oil control rings, they come in 3 pieces. So we have this little gem which goes in the middle, and that just basically, if you look at the piston, we'll really push the camera here. If you look at the piston, you can see those holes. I bet this camera's crapping itself right now. That basically will go over the holes, and that provides, as you can see there, that provides a passage for the oil to return through the inside of the piston back into the sump of the motor. So it's basically providing a conduit for the oil to travel. And then we've got these 2 little gems here. Now they're the scraper rings, and there's 2 of those that form the oil control ring assembly, and they go one on the top of that middle ring, that middle bit that I just showed you, and on the bottom as well. So there's one on either side, but I'll show you that in a minute. So that's basically all you need to know to install a set of rings correctly in the correct orientation. If you don't install them in the correct orientation, in the very least the motor won't go as well as it should, and it could possibly fail. So just popping those back in there again so you can look at that and contemplate it for a second. Silver ring, top ring, black ring, second ring. That's marked 2R, and that one is simply marked R. There are variations on the theme. You know, sometimes there will be 1R. Y is another one. That's typical of Chinese products. But that's the sum of it. So the next thing we need to do is get these rings onto the piston without breaking them. That's not as hard as it sounds, but you do need to take care. Let's have a look at that. Now I'm going to introduce to you 2 of my best friends. If I get that in there. Okay. Magnifying glass. 8 times magnification. Beautiful. Jeweler's loupe. 30 times magnification. So this allows me to have a really close look at things like that. those markings, see what they say, and it allows me to check my work. So there's 2 purchases for your workshop that you might consider. Anyway, we'll pull those out of the way. Now I'm going to use this piston, which is just a blank. I like playing with these, machining things off them and stuff. Now, without even thinking, because I've done this so many times, I've thrown that oil control center spacer in there. So this is probably the easiest of all of them to fit. Sometimes there is an up and down to these. Once again, look for marks and that sort of thing. Most of the time there simply isn't. And he goes on that lowermost ring groove there. And you need to sit him in there and just make sure that the ends butt against each other. Just find the... There we go. So they should butt against each other like that. They shouldn't climb over each other and overlap. So that's your first step. So we'll just throw him on there. Make sure that they're fine. Now the oil rings, they're very thin and very compliant, and you can get away with those to a fair degree. It's usually the compression rings that you break. So I'm going to start him there, and you can actually see what I'm doing there is feeding him nice and gently onto the underside of that. Making sure that he fits there. Hasn't climbed over. See what I mean about the magnifying glass being useful? So he's sitting there quite well. So we will move on to the next one. And just find where the gap is on that ring. So it's there. So we don't want these gaps lining up. And once again, just feeding him on nice and gently. There we go. So we've got one gap there and the other one there. Let's have a look. Nice. Anybody would have thought that I've done this before. Yep. Okay, so we go to our black ring, the second ring. Now he's a lot thicker, so he's stiffer. And probably the best way would be just to gently get him over the top of the piston, like that. And then when you come to this end, alright, so we've landed him in the top ring by accident, but that's not a tragedy. Put him into the second ring gap. And you can see what I'm doing is actually grabbing that and expanding the ring, you know, like that, but very gently. If you expand that too far, you will certainly know about it because it will break. You can also see that the ring gap closes up there as the thing comes, as you push the ring in. You can see how that gap closes up, and you know, there is a gap on those rings. And of course, once you've got that ring in there, first thing you do is check to make sure that you've got that mark facing up. So that mark there is towards the top of the piston, and we just repeat that. With the top ring, so nice. So that's ready to go. You would at this point oil him up and put him in a bore. And we'll do the same to our standard piston. Start from scratch. Make sure that that doesn't butt. Ooh, slippery buggers. I didn't like the way that sat. That's come into the top end of that control ring, so we're just going to flip into the bottom like that. Nice. And the top one. The gaps, one there, one there. Check our handiwork. Nice. Once again, second ring, gently over the top. What you need to be careful, particularly with smaller diameter pistons, believe it or not, is that you don't scratch the piston with the corner of the ring there. Now, it's not a tragedy if you do, it's just something you want to avoid, and if there's a massive burr there you want to remove it. So this is a situation where you potentially can break rings. The second ring, in my opinion, is always trickier than the top one. There we go. There's our top ring mark, our ring mark showing where it is. Finally, the top one, and they're always so easy because they only have to, you don't have to jump them over a groove, and that's easy, and that's done. If it's your first piston, take your time, seriously. If you do break a ring, or something goes wrong, if it's one of our kits, definitely send me a message through eBay or email me. I do carry spares, rings, pistons, bores, you know, it's all out there. There is an obligation for us to provide parts for some length of time, and I'd rather hear about how we had a success rather than a failure due to a broken ring. If you do break a ring, do not continue to assemble the engine. It's just a recipe for disaster. It will fail. The last thing I'd like to look at is actually that very dangerous time when we have the piston connected to the connecting rod and we're dropping the cylinder on top. So it's the assembly of the engine basically. Now if you have a look, there's a chamfer on here. That isn't square. There's a slight lead into the cylinder. Now you can use a ring compressor, and if you have one, definitely use it. I find it difficult to use a ring compressor on smaller motors, and I use the low dollar equivalent where I basically utilise that chamfer to my advantage. I line the piston up to the top of the cylinder and I compress the rings with my fingers, and I take my time while I'm doing it, and that is basically all you need to get that piston into the cylinder. Now a good coat of oil, just a good smear, so everything goes in there nice and easy, and that's all you'll need to get it in there. It won't be as easy as what I've just demonstrated on a brand new engine. This is our 175 cylinder. It's basically done a few Ks. I mean, you can look at that and you can just see that that is still relatively new. There's no wear or anything like that, but it's gone through that initial running in period, and that means that instead of having a rough surface in there, it has been smoothed out by the piston rubbing against the cylinder, and believe it or not, that makes it a heck of a lot easier to install things. So it doesn't hurt to locate the gap, and then we know to push that in around the gap. It's one ring in. The compression rings are the ones that will give you the most grief. Oil rings on the other hand, well, they're just always so cooperative. But you can see in that instance, there's the gap of the bottom oil ring there, and that is just a little bit tight. There we go. Done like a dinner. And that's it. Now, as I said before, we do carry spares. We'd rather see your installation be successful. If you break a ring or you have a problem, it's better to contact us than to try and persevere and not get the result that we want you to have. Now, I'm just going to have one last little boast before I go. That's our big bore. That's our standard. It's a rattling good fit. Oop, need that. Okay, have a great day.